Seaside signature, Wesley is your South America 1v1 Winter Champion!
Right then everybody, it's your boy back at it again with the first episode of our new series for 2022. But what is exactly pro player analysis? It's a series of videos where I go to certain tournament sets from different pro players, trying to explain, describe, and showcase some of the most high-level gameplay Brawlhalla has ever seen. Of course, while trying to tear it apart so you, the audience, can have a deep look onto the greatness that is competitive play. We're taking a trip to the past, specifically onto winters from 2021. We're gonna be focusing on the next player. Player Wesley. Region South America. Tournament set Winter Champs 2021 Grand Finals. For these type of sets in particular, Game 10 sets, I'm gonna look over 4 matches in total. 1 win and 1 loss from the winner's side, and 1 win and 1 loss from the loser's side. This set in particular describes how sticking to your gut and principles might often get you to the victory. Let's dive into it. In this tournament, Wesley has been going pretty much all the way with Macho Man. We see that confidence going on to Game 1, where he'll face off his toughest opponent yet, a dominant Lopez going with Sir Roland. We can already see it's gonna be a tough match, since Dittos always take more cautiousness than a normal matchup, and that can be already seen by Lopez's counterpick against Wesley's axe. A counterpick that can be expected since their first set was a dominant victory for Wesley's Macho Man, and almost 30 seconds into the game, we can see that the counterpick is doing wonders for Lopez. From this first stock alone, we can already see the pattern. Wesley throws out a move, but because axe is lower than sword, Lopez weaves out of it and punishes it. Wesley's lance is trying to shine through the second stock, getting a little bit of damage here and there, and even a potential edgeguard situation, which Wesley misses out by a couple frames. But sadly, that little momentum won't last for much since Lopez's sword is tearing through both Wesley's lance and axe. This is where the dilemmas start. While Wesley gets his first stock after a couple seconds of doing footsies after respawning, the damage is already done. A repeat from the first seconds of the match is what determines the fate of this match. Wesley tries to attack, but because lance is lower than sword, he gets punished. We can see both players pretty much wanting to go to the next match, going for cheeky stuff like that double ground pound from Lopez and the sloppy edgeguard from Wesley, followed by a downstick edgeguard that's gonna seal the match. We have in mind that Lopez won, so he's obliged to pick his legend first on the second match. That leaves out the opportunity to Wesley to take a breather, think about what happened in the first match, and then go with a counterpick. And as expected, Lopez goes onto Sir Roland, and Wesley does the swap too. Going deeper into the set, we get to a Game 4 where Wesley seems to have figured out his winning strat. After losing on his first counterpick on Game 2, and scratching a win on Game 3 with a solid damage lead, Wesley picks up Bryn as a counter to Lopez's Roland, sticking with the axe from Game 1, and adding up a spear that previously shined on Game 3. Now let's see the gameplay changes from him. A couple seconds into the match, Wesley gets the upper hand by grabbing his first weapon, while after getting a couple hits, he will be rewarded with a bad weapon spawn for Lopez, a lance, matchup that is close to horrible for lance. We can see a different type of aggression compared to Game 1. Wesley knows that throwing out moves on Game 1 was the thing that led him onto his demise, so he opts to do the same but on a different way, aiming to the opponent rather than aiming where he thinks his opponent would be. That translates onto big grounded coverage and a potential weapon start situation. Lopez is now on the back end of the match, and that forces him to aggress. Now Wesley is the one that baits out and punishes him for it. While the match looks to be onto Wesley's side, we can see a main issue that's reminiscent from Game 1. Wesley continues to throw out moves in places where she shouldn't, eventually leading onto Lopez taking the first stock, but that doesn't stop Wesley from eventually getting his first stock too after a sloppy but flawless series of events. Wesley gets the upper hand in the match after picking up a spear after reading 2 successful dodge-in reads with Nair and Sidesick, but sadly immediately dropping the edgeguard situation after going for a cheeky weapon throw, followed by a ground pound that was frames off getting Lopez. Lopez tries to cut off Wesley's momentum, but Wesley has apparently learned from his mistakes, this time taking his time to approach and throwing off safe options like that Racing Sair. After hitting 2 spear pogos, he secures the edgeguard with a delayed ground pound. Last stock can be summarized with a solid damage lead and an immediate response from Lopez, who takes the stock with a delayed dare recovery on sword, Sadly, he will throw his sword and pick up a lance, which hasn't really shined for him on the past 4 games, eventually leading on to Wesley having backed up an axe for his next weapon spawn, getting him the upper hand in the matchup and eventually the KO. What have we learned from 1 loss and 1 win? Lopez's counter pick is mainly focused on the sword pick, a fast weapon. Wesley adapted to the counter pick and thus started to throw out safe moves. Wesley adapted his gameplay with a character counter pick, but sadly that wasn't gonna cut it. Wesley is forced to pick his character first, goes on to win after progressively getting the best of Lopez, and Lopez himself takes advantage of that and counters Wesley with his pick of his own, quite literally going on to a brindle, and the rest, is history. Let's quick recap the couple first games of the loser side. Wesley goes onto his original pick, Macho Man, as an unexpected counter for Lopez's rising momentum with Rin. Learning his mistake from game 1 on the winner's side, Wesley starts using Axe more, and most importantly, in a different way as we saw in the games after game 1. He started using footsies on the ground and on the air while on lands, trying to bait out before he throws out any move, knowing that in one miss, Lopez can easily turn everything around. Going actually onto game 4, we see a whole different scenario. After losing the Brain Macho Man matchup against Wesley, Lopez decides to go onto Barraza, which chimed for a little bit, but gave Lopez a lot of troubles at the end, because as we saw from earlier in the set, when it comes to Axe versus Axe, up to that point, Wesley had the upper hand, leading Lopez to counterpick yet again with Thor, a complete turnaround from every other counterpick we've seen over this set. The first seconds into the match, we can already see a repeat from game 1 on the winner's side. Lopez being dominant with a faster weapon and Wesley not knowing how to adapt quickly. But now there's a twist. Another thing Wesley has to keep in mind, Lopez's hammer is known to be one, if not the best hammer in South America. So having it on his pocket is a huge threat to Wesley. A clear example is right there after throwing his orb, picks a hammer and recognizes that Wesley doesn't have any movement option left, throws out a down sig, and that pretty much seals the deal. We can see it on the second stock that Wesley tries to cut off Lopez's momentum with hammer, going immediately on the axe counter, but sadly Lopez recognizes that attempt and quickly throws it away, afterwards getting more damage before Wesley seals Lopez's first stock. But Lopez's plan won't come out as expected, since Wesley gets the best of him with lance after shipping damage away with every of Lopez's whiff on hammer, followed by a weapon starve situation and 2 axe stairs that will end Lopez's second stock and will give Wesley an air of opportunity, even if seconds after Lopez shuts down any of the rising momentum. Wesley now knows that he can pull this set if he tunes down his previous habits. That can be clearly seen in the next couple seconds, where Wesley stays on the ground throwing safe moves and playing footsies. Sadly, the only thing getting on his way is the dominant control of Lopez while he's onto that orb, much like Sword on the first games. Wesley being on the slower weapon allows Lopez to chip out damage based off quick hit and a juggle interaction, and that pretty much ends game 4 after the nerves get the best of Wesley. Even if Lopez won the previous 2 games, you would think the momentum is all towards him, but based on his sloppy performance on both Barraza and Thor, this set is entirely on Wesley's hand, who now knows when to aggress, knows how to play when he's on the losing matchup, and most importantly, who has Lopez's characters downloaded to the point where he can take this to game 5. But onto a weird note, Lopez goes back on his foot and picks up Barraza, probably his worst counter pick on the entire set. First seconds onto the match, we can see a damage trade between Lopez and Wesley, keeping the game tight, both throwing his weapons after getting a couple hits on their opponents. Seconds after, Lopez goes off stage on a sloppy mess of misinputs and pays the price for it. A horrible weapon recovery and a smart ramp from Wesley gets the first stock of the game. Wesley gets a couple hits on the Axe vs Axe matchup, and almost get an early stock on the edgeguard situation, which he also gets off without losing his stock after weaving out a weapon throw from Lopez, who has already recognized that if he continues trying to best Wesley on the Axe matchup, it will eventually lead to him losing the match. Seconds after the edgeguard situation, Lopez gets a breather after hitting a delay recovery on blasters, but that sadly won't help him at all, because now on a fresh stock, Wesley gets the one reach he's been fishing for every time he's been on lands, followed by a juggle interaction that will lead onto a clean KO without getting hit. Now on the last stock, Wesley primed his axe, knowing that Lopez is gonna have blasters on his next weapon spawn. Forces Lopez to stay on the air, doing the same strat that has been working for him on the past games, sticking to the ground, throwing safe moves, and forcing Lopez off his main weapons. Seconds after shows what I previously said, no Lopez with an axe on his hands, having to play the ditto against Wesley, who's been dominant on that matchup, keeping Lopez on the back end, and after a missed taunt and a couple screams from Sparky, seals the deal with a GC sidestick that catches Lopez on his worst state, overwhelmed by his nerves, and getting him to do the bad habit of staying on the air for an extended period of time. Wesley is your winter champion in 2021, and it was all thanks to sticking to his original pick, minimizing his bad habits from the previous games, Lopez's counterpick strike cracking up after getting downloaded by Wesley, not letting the character swaps and the counterpicks get to his head. While there are losing matchups and winning matchups, just because your opponent swapped doesn't mean you're gonna lose. We can clearly see it here. Wesley got caught trying to solve his problems by going onto different characters, rather than trying to fix his bad habits from game 1 first. While he was on the Brent pick, he started to fix his gameplay on the axe, that eventually led him to go back onto the Macho Man and excel with him. On the other side, we saw the opposite from Lopez, who had a solid game plan on the beginning with Sir Roland, but eventually started to crack up once Wesley got the best of him. Lopez kept trying to swap characters, and because he saw a couple improvements with them, he overlooked the fact that Wesley was slowly adapting. If you're better than someone, that will be shown on your abilities and your decisions over the course of your games. Not because you swap your characters 24/7. While there are losing and winning matchups, bad and good weapons, you can still do your best on your main pick, and this set is the perfect example of it. That will conclude the end of episode 1 of Pro Player Analysis. If you have any suggestions about this video, about the format of this video, or about the way I go over the sets, please let them in the comments. Any criticism is, obviously gladly taken. And as always, thank you for watching.